Welcome to GovTalk. I'm Christian Dixon, and on this show, we're going to bring you into the minds of experts and thought leaders supporting and within state and local government. From GovInvest and AdastraGov, this is GovTalk, a podcast about government, finance, and labor, and how they are impacted by current events. It's Thursday, April 9th. Thank you all for your great engagement and attendance during the first two episodes of GovTalk. This week, we're talking about the CARES Act and some of the details within the stimulus package that may have been overlooked. Today, our guest is Dorien Nunez, Director of Research and co-founder of the Omni Research Group. Dorien graduated from Harvard as an undergraduate and went on to receive his MBA from Harvard Business School, where he won an award for his research on the use of futures market for institutional investors to hedge risks. Later recognized by the Kauffman Foundation for his efforts in teaching Black and youth entrepreneurship, Dorien continues his support by promoting and educating minority and female students going into the investment and finance industry. Dorien has spent years advising mayors, governors, and even past presidents on various small business development efforts in support of a changing economy, and has since championed education programs for pension fund trustees used by some of the largest pension funds in the world. Dorien, tell us a little bit more about your background and how you found yourself at Omni.
Okay, great. First, I'm glad to be here. Sorry for some of the stuff we're going to talk about, but here we are. I'm originally a native of New York City, and Omni Research Group is a investment consulting and research firm that I co-founded. We've got about 6 professionals and with a support staff working with us, and we primarily do pension fund and investment research and analysis, but dealing with pension funds, especially public funds, you deal with their budgets and things that impact their funding status. So our specialty is in helping those funds to improve their funded status, especially if they're underfunded, through a variety of strategies. Now we've taken a deep dive into the CARES Act because it's so important to us, and we're all suffering here. I'm here in New Orleans, Louisiana right now, where I'm living, and enduring is probably the better way, surviving. I'm one of those high-risk people, so I'm self-quarantined. I'm fine, but we're in the epicenter of this, and that made us reach out to figure out what can governments do to improve their budgets. New Orleans has been hit particularly hard. It depends on travel, tourism, and some other things that are part of its economy.
New Orleans and Louisiana has been hit pretty hard by the virus itself as a per capita measure. And you're saying that's due to some of the tourism and some of the travel that really happens a lot through those areas. How is it affecting the mindset of the people out there?
Well, it's having a toll. I mean, we canceled St. Patrick's Day parade. We have a huge jazz fest that happens at the end of April and the beginning of May. That's been canceled.
Wow.
This town really depends on those things to raise its revenues and raise its spirit and be part of its image. So this is a social town. People may know that when we have a funeral, you march to the funeral in a solemn fashion, you turn around and you dance in the street on the way back. It's called the second line. Well, those are all gone. So we've been on lockdown. Let me make a point how our mayor and governor have demonstrated a lot of leadership by trying to do it as early as they can. And but it's just a big impact. Heavy African American community. So 70% of the deaths have been African American. 32% of the population of Louisiana is African American. So it's challenging. It's tough. It's tough. I know people who tested positive and they're over 50, and we're praying. That's what we're doing. We're praying.
Well, and I know it's been really tough for a lot of the states out there, but particularly Louisiana, and how it's hit it so fast and so hard. And that's what we're talking about here today, is we're going to continue that journey on COVID-19 and the impacts to state and local government. And as many of the listeners from the other episodes are aware, that the global markets have been hit very hard over the past few months. In the last episode, we covered the potential $1 trillion in net pension liability increases that may be on the horizon if funds don't normalize soon. And it's projected that the nation's largest pension fund, CalPERS, had $404 billion in assets about a month ago, Dorien, and what we're seeing is it's a drop to around 350 billion as of today, and some estimated around $70 billion in fund loss over the recent months. So, with this COVID crash and the strategies that other funds are facing, not just CalPERS, and with your background as a financial analyst, what can you tell us about the stock market in general and a little bit about the pension side as well?
Sure. I think well, here are a couple of things. First of all, when it comes to the stock market, my standard advice is the market will go up, it will go down, or it will go sideways. Now you want me to tell you when that's going to happen, and that's even harder to do. So I think, having said that, people I think they should remember that 0809, the market crashed. It took years to come back, but the Dow was at 11,000 about 10 years ago. So we see where it is now. If you remember the rule of 72, which says that how long it takes to double, the market's gone up about 7%, over 7%. That's just the stock market. So the other issue is what's happening in real estate, what's happening in the other markets, and low fixed income rates. So I think the market is going to behave pretty well just because the Fed and the Treasury are doing everything they can to prop it up. And until we solve this health issue, it's going to be choppy waters all around. That's I don't think anybody can argue with that. We don't time the market, and long-term investors shouldn't try to time the market. You should average down and take your time buying in. Now, pension funds, public pension funds, have to be very careful. Revenues are down, state revenues are down, the federal government's deep in debt, and so your revenues are down. Las Vegas is empty. Tourism and travel, that's come to a standstill, and yet your pension fund contributions are going up. So pension contributions go up, your revenues go down, you're stuck in the middle. And that's why people need to pay attention to the CARES Act, because there may be some relief in here if the municipality takes a step and look at it. The good news is interest rates are low. So if you issued a bond to try to raise money, then you're doing it at a low interest rate. But who's going to buy those bonds? Well, the Fed just came out and kind of said that they're going to do whatever it takes and that they're willing to buy some municipal bonds if they have to. So that's what everybody's juggling with. It's like a Rubik's Cube trying to put it all together. And that's why we have done this report, which we're going to come out with next week for people who want to focus on this and try to get ahead of it. I have to mention one thing. There's 150, I want to make sure I mention this 6 times at least. There's $150 billion that's going out to state governments and to large cities over 500,000 in employees, in population. If you're less than 500,000, you have to get it to your state. But that money is supposed to go out by the end of the month. So if you aren't in the queue and you aren't in touch with your governor, or if you aren't requesting it directly from the Treasury, use it or lose it. You need to be on top of that and be aggressive in figuring out how to get some of that for your own local area.
And you mentioned a report. Is that what you guys are covering at Omni right now? Is just the CARES Act and what local and state governments should be considering with that? Or tell us a little bit more about the report that you're focusing on.
Sure. After getting a lot of questions from a lot of people, because we are Omni Research and we do research and analysis of financial analysis, we're putting together a simple 2-page report. The CARES Act is 880 pages, and then the regulations that come out are going to be 30 to 120 pages. We're going through this. We have a team of people analyzing this, and we're going to put forth a 2-page cheat sheet that if people email us at omniresearch@AOL, couldn't be easier, omniresearch@AOL, we're happy to share that with people. And then they can, there'll be some links as well if they want to do their own work, their own research, to get through this, because it's a lot of stuff to get through.
Well, I appreciate that, Dorien, for sharing that. We'll make sure to share that in the resources as well on our end. Now, as we're going back a little bit, I want to take a step back to the first 2 relief packages, and not to go into too much detail, but just to cover the fact that there has been 2 other packages that have been released as well up to this point. And so Congress passed this significant package to curb the impacts of COVID-19, and several weeks of shelter at home for us, and many of us having to go through unemployment, seeing significant rates, unprecedented rates on that. How has the timing of a stimulus and offering that to state and local government and to the population. How is it hitting us now? Are people taking advantage of it that you're hearing, or is it delayed? Is it too late? What are your thoughts there from your research?
Well, what we're hearing is it's delay. That when these provisions were announced, people tried to call their state unemployment offices. They can't get through. The money's there. The money's going to come. But how do you get through the door? I'm a native of New York. It's kind of like the subway train is here, but you're at the top of the staircase and you got to get through Grand Central Station. You got to get down and get through this crowd. Or you're trying to get into a stadium through one door. So you have to find side doors and back doors and ways to get around it in order to tap into part of the $2 trillion that impacts you. Hopefully people can hold on. I think they'll get it right. They'll get the money out. But anybody who tried to sign up for Obamacare, they're glitches. So I'm not apologizing for the government. I'm just trying to say glitches are to be expected. How you survive in the meantime, we all have to try to figure that out.
And this is something that we've never dealt with before. At least most of us in our lifetime have never seen anything like this. And I know that you guys are specializing in evaluating these acts. And you mentioned to me on a previous call that there's some things that could be overlooked in the bill, and with this act and with this relief package. What makes you say that? What makes you say that something is being overlooked? And is that for state and local government, or is that for the average citizen?
Well, it's really across the board. For example, let's stick with state and local governments. There's a lot of talk about the unemployment, as you mentioned, and that's fantastic. There's a lot of talk about the SBA loans. It's $390 billion, and that's fantastic, especially since some of them can convert to a grant. It's hard for the banks to get this money out pretty quickly. Some banks said they need guidance, they need clearance, but that's really hard to get out. But what isn't talked about is on the business side, SBA express loans. If you already have a bank, the SBA has a program that for express loans where they raise the limit. That money goes out in 36 hours. Not hearing a lot of conversation about that. You just have to find out if your bank is an SBA express loan lender or if they could become one. And if you're a small business, you could go after that money as well. And you don't have to stand in line for the other loan funds that exist. You can look at the SBA Express loan if that works for you. Small business development centers are able to get about $10 million. I think it may be more than that, so that they can do education, training, and small business support. Not hearing a whole lot about that. Minority business centers, they also have access to some funds. Not hearing a lot about that. Native American tribal organizations have a specific opportunity to go after $8 billion, that's billion with a B, that's allocated specifically for those entities. So if you're a government official and you've got Native American tribal organizations in your state or municipality, you need to help them develop and help make them aware of this, that there's $8 billion for them. There's $139 billion for state and local governments. And that money is going to get allocated by the end of the month. I keep talking about this because there's a hard deadline on this, it seems. And that's $139 billion going out to all states based upon their population. And that money is going to the governor. Unless you're a city of more than 500,000, then you can apply for it directly, but you have to apply for it directly and be on top of it and do it. We don't want to assume that everybody knows what's going on out there, because many times that's not the case, especially if you're smaller than 500,000. You may not be getting that information you need, so you can't call your governor and say, here's what we need. We want to make sure that we get it, and we know that relief is coming allegedly before the end of the month. A lot of this we cover in the report, and we're talking to law firms and others to help hold people's hands through this process so that we're all in this together. We can keep our economy going while we strive to find a health solution. Historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, a lot of them in the Southeast and the Midwest, there's $62 million just for them to defer some loan payments and other things. Not hearing a lot about that either. So 880 pages is a lot of stuff in there. And we're nerds. That's what we are. So we don't play fantasy football, and I don't do video games. We go through all of those pages and extract what's in there, and then we try to share it with people that we reach out to, or who reach out to us.
Well, let's dive in a little bit more on that. So you're saying that there's small businesses, there's minority-owned businesses as well, including colleges and higher education. School districts, I'm assuming, are included in that. Tribal organizations, state and local government. You've been doing the research. What are you seeing right now you say that some of this stuff has not been talked about enough? What are the things that you've seen more talked about? What are the things that have kind of been overkill on the news? And what are some things that you think are important that people should be hearing right now that are not covered nearly enough?
Right. Well, clearly the unemployment benefits for people is relevant because 17 million people have gone for unemployment benefits. So that's huge. So I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I think you have to hit those big strokes. $390 billion for small business lending, some of it that could be forgivable. That's huge. And so that needs to be covered. But if you add those numbers together, $2 trillion is a huge number. It's a big number. And that's why we read footnotes and we go into particular details. So why hasn't it been covered? Because you can only cover but so much of this. And if you think about a chamber of commerce, or you think about, a city official, they care about unemployment, job loss. That's the first order. That's the big thing. Let's go after it. But you got to dig deeper. And I'm going to hit again on this, $150 billion for states. Territories are get $3 billion. So if you're Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, there's an allocation specifically for those locations. There's money for $25 billion for transit system. So if you don't know about it, there's grants for rural areas. So you don't get something passed with 90% of the Senate unless there's something in it for everybody. And they twisted arms. There's a lot of stuff that's not in here, but there's a ton of stuff that is.
Right, and right now this is a multiple installment relief package that we hear more and more about other things coming out. But what do you see as the impact of this? These relief packages. Is this the right move? Is that there's a lot of economists out there that are talking about how this is a poorly put together idea. It was rushed. It's going to only hurt the economy further. But then other ones in the stock market analysts out there seeing the benefits from this as trading continues and it spikes returns. What are you seeing from Omni, and what are your economists kind of working on right now with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's an old expression in contracting: you can do it fast, you can do it right, you can do it cheap. You can do two of those three. So they did this fast. And if you go back to 08, 09, they really took a 6-month time period of acting and have condensed it into a 30, 60, 90-day period. This isn't over. Right now, the Senate's trying to do another $250 billion for small business. That got rejected because the Democrats in the House want to put up something that's $500 billion. So this is just one of maybe 4 things that are going to come down the pipe. This itself is the third thing. So there is going to be more, and that's why you have to pay attention real time, almost on a 3-day basis. Every 72 hours, something else is happening. So that's the first thing. And now, is this going to be good or bad? I guarantee that there's waste in here. I guarantee that there's some things that aren't going to work right, and we're going to be able to look back and say, "Oh, gee, if we only would have done it better." But we tried to do it fast. Right. So we got to accept that it's done fast. Is it done right? I'm going to say 2/3 of it, yes. 1/3, probably not. That's just a guess. But that's it. And but we had to do something. We had to shore up the economy. But nothing's going to get much, much better in the long run. Right now, there's faith that we're going to figure out a cure or a testing mechanism or something to adapt to this new normal. And we all hope so, and we pray so. Let's hope so.
Well, and Dorien, tell me a little bit more about Omni and some of the states and governments that you guys have worked for, because you mentioned at the top of the episode that you do a little bit on pension, you do a little bit on other types of funding status and support for pension plans, and,
right.
and a lot of our listeners here come from state and local government. They either are a part of their own single employment plan or they are a multi-employer plan like CalPERS and other state plans. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've done and how that kind of wraps up with this CARES Act a little bit and tie this all together for us?
Well, over the years, we've done trustee education and training, including trustees from CalPERS back in the 80s. So that's sort of the core of what we do. And when you do trustee education and training and the market keeps changing and the trustees keep changing, you just continue to evolve in that particular area. So that's a lot of what we do. And then the issues with funded status. So that led us into, is there a better way to manage the assets of a pension fund that can reduce risk and improve funded status without excessively increasing contributions? So we focus a lot on those types of strategies for people because that's what the need is. And we've done work with Ohio, we've done work with here in New Orleans. We've teamed up with actuaries and analyzed changes to the pension plan. We don't like to do a lot of pension plan changes because that's pretty hard to do, but we do like to do pension fund analysis where we can look at your liabilities, look at your assets, look at strategies to enhance returns, strategies to be inclusive. We care a lot about diversity and inclusion. And the U.S. Conference of Mayors, as a matter of fact, has said that they want to include the number of minorities and women asset managers in their pension funds. We're very much on top of that. So that's what we do. And for the people who are listening or watching this, you need to get ahead of this because you're going to get blindsided at the end. You may be thinking that you've got assets to make your pension payment. If the municipality is slow in giving you the money, you're going to have to liquidate assets to do that. How do you do that in a cost-effective fashion? And how do you get some of this money that's out there and be able to claim that the coronavirus impacted your fund and therefore some of the relief money should perhaps trickle over to you? You've got to wrestle with your municipality for that, but we're all in this together. If you're not aware of it, you can't ask for it.
Well, Dorien, is there any, in the CARES Act and those relief packages, is there anything about pension in those, or is it specifically for general use? How is that operating for the state and local governments?
Yeah, and this is one of the gaps that I see in the plan. The mention of pensions is for private sector single employer plans. And what it appears to allow them to do is defer their pension contribution. And that, we think, is the exact wrong thing. By the way, I need to put a disclaimer here. Our report will come out next week. So everything I'm giving you are initial impressions and insights. And our final official insight will be what we put on paper. But as we read it, a corporation that has a defined benefit plan, single employer, not even multi-employer, is able to defer their pension payment. And that's the exact wrong thing. That means that an underfunded multi-employer plan in particular, even a single employer plan, will have to liquidate assets, make payments, and if the market turns around and comes back, it's going to have less money in that plan to turn around and take advantage of that increase in value from the marketplace, and that's going to put it behind the eight ball even a little bit more. So I don't think that wasn't well thought through. I think, in my opinion, some corporations said, we don't want to make the pension payment. How do we get out of it? And this seems to allow them to do that. Someone else may have a different perspective, but that's that. How does that impact public pension funds? Well, first of all, you need to take a look at that. And that's the only mention of pensions. And you need to start figuring out if there's a way that you can address the bigger part of the CARES Act, because clearly somebody thought about pension contributions as an issue. So instead of deferring a payment, they could make a loan to help you make the payment. And it's $500 billion at the Treasury Department to make loans to state and local municipalities, and making a pension contribution might be one of them. Let me mention one other thing here too. If you look at the CARES Act, it's 880 pages. The House passed a bill that was 1,240 pages, and there's a lot of stuff inside those extra 450 pages. One of them is an old program called the Butch-Lewis Act that's been trying to get traction for years. It finally made it through the House, where multi-employer plans can get a loan from the Treasury. Listen to this. Get a loan for the Treasury, a 30-year interest-only loan at a low interest rate for a troubled pension plan. That's for multi-employer plans. So if there are any labor union people here, they should pay attention to that. And other entities should focus on that and see if they can get something similar to that as a request from the Treasury. And that will help shore up the pension funds of a lot of these pension plans if they just adopt the language of the Butch-Lewis Act, which says you can only buy deferred annuities, you can only buy fixed income investments, you can only do cash flow immunization. So that's a technical piece, but people here on GovTalk need to be aware of things that are already halfway through Congress, and it might be part of something down the road, or you could go straight to the Treasury and make a case as to why that $500 billion should partially be used to offset some of these challenges.
Well, that's a lot of information there. I think that, like you mentioned, those 800 or 1,200 plus pages is just so much to take in for any person who's right now focusing on their current labor situation. They're worried about their employees. They're worried about their services that they have to maintain to keep revenues up. Trying to stimulate the economy himself. I know of one, Miami Beach, who's doing what they can to put money back into small businesses and put grants out there, and I'm sure that many other are. But one thing that you mentioned, which I found interesting, was the impact of labor unions, and we're talking about the unions here, not the union groups within the governments, but the unions themselves. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and how that's going to impact them, or what they should be thinking about?
Well, the unions need to, and they need to pay attention to this. But I have one contact say to me, "We're trying to save jobs. There's blood out here in the streets," and he's right. You know, old expression. You know, when you're up to your neck in alligators, you forget that you were trying to drain the swamp. So everybody's got alligators, and a lot of unions are suffering, and they're trying to figure out what they can do and what they need to do to keep the employees going and keep payments going to them. But some of these loan programs are available for nonprofit organizations. So one thing that they can do is they can actually go off and try to get some of these loans, get some of this money allocated to them. Some of these loans become grants, and see what they can do to stop the bleeding of their members by doing that. On the pension side, if they're multi-employer plan, there's nothing in this bill that I see that helps them yet, not from the one that was passed, but they need to pick up the ball on what was passed in the House before and what was proposed to be in this plan, and see if that can become part of the one of the next versions of this to try to address. Treasury has $500 billion, and it only takes about 30 or 40 billion to help the worst funded multi-employer plans in the country to be made whole for them. So we're happy to interact and share some information about that. And that's what needs to happen. We need to all be transmitters of information to people. That's something that we can all do that's pretty easy. And say, hey, are you aware of this? Are you aware of this opportunity? Are you on top of this? Go get some more information. Call Christian at the GovTalks and get information from him. Or again, they can reach out to us, whichever way works for them, and be on top of this. We could do calls like this, and we expect to be doing calls like this on a continuous basis to put this information out in slices. If you're a municipality, CalPERS is going to come to you with a big bill soon. So you need to get ahead of that. And the way you get ahead of that is you figure out in advance what that bill might be, and then you figure out other sources to mitigate it and see what you can do. One last point I'll make, Christian, you look at what happened to Stockton, California, went bankrupt during the last crisis. So that's, you got to keep an eye on that and see how your municipality is doing and get ahead of it. City of Detroit, with its bankruptcy, had to renegotiate a lot of contracts and do some things when it went bankrupt. So we did some actuarial analysis on the city of Detroit, and those are examples that exist, real world examples of what people did, and you have to figure out if what happened there, not going bankrupt, but what the outcome was, can help you prevent going bankrupt, or help you get ahead of what's going on. That's what the Fed is doing. They're all taking the old playbook from '08 and '09 and trying to enhance it.
Right, right. And I think that's the challenge today. Again, we don't know what the right answer is, and we do the best that we can and as fast as we can to make sure to mitigate as much impact as we can. So I think it's really important to know that, there's people out there, there's information out there being shared by organizations like the National League of Cities, NACO, the National Association of Counties, and also the State Legislators Association. So, if you're out there, if you're listening to this, if you're state, local, or otherwise other type of government, go out there and ask your associations for information. If they don't have it, they probably know someone who does. We will be posting information out there from GovTalk, working with Dorien and Omni on his 2-page summary. We'll be posting those. And Dorien, before we wrap this up, is there anything else that we should be aware of as listeners right now? Any kind of main points as far as the next package, the relief, or anything else that you're focused on that you think is important to note?
Well, how to access the $150 billion is supposed to come out next week. So even though you have to ask for it by the end of the month, so that's going to create a mad scramble by state and local governments to get their share of it. And then you're going to have to figure out how to access the money that the governors get. We've got data on how much each state is probably going to get from this $150 billion. And you can figure out what your state is going to get, and then you can be aggressive in pursuing how some of that comes to you. Every state is going to get a minimum of $1.2 billion. So regardless of your population, regardless of the impact that you've had, every state gets a minimum of $1.2 billion. So that's important for even the smallest states to take advantage of and to pursue and go after. The municipal bond buyback program is going to come out. And so that's something you've got to think about. How do you finance yourself with the money that's coming from the Fed, which is different from, this particular pool of money that we're talking about? You just have to stay on top of this. Stay in touch with Christian, or again, if you reach out to us, we'll keep you informed. We're probably going to put research notes out twice a week because it's such a moving target and it keeps getting clarified as we go on. And the last thing I'll say, and I think I said it already, that the end of the month is that $150 billion is going to get allocated. So get in the queue now. Is stay tuned for what the Fed is announced today, and also we need to look at the House bill and see what was in there that might become part of the next step in terms of relief package that's going to come out.
I really look forward to seeing the results of that research that you guys are putting together there, Dorien. And where's, again, the information? Obviously, you have a website, and we'll be posting that in the page, the episode summary as well, and on our LinkedIn page. But what was the email address that listeners can send to in order if they wanted to get their own version sent to them?
Sure. Now, we tried to make it simple. So it's Omni Research, OMNI Research, RESEARCH, Omni Research at AOL.com. So put in the subject line CARE Act information or pension fund information or financial crisis information. Any of those three will know exactly what you're talking about. And we're happy to share information, which we will also share with GovTalks to work on as well. And we'll give you access to our website that you can follow future information that we put out as well. But Omni Research at AOL.com.
That's fantastic. And Dorien, I just want to thank you for taking the time. And as we go ahead and post these details out there and you update them, please feel free to share them with us at GovTalk so that we can post them for other listeners and other viewers on the website as well. And again, thank you for taking the time here. We look forward to hopefully having you back on the show in the future date. And if you have any questions for us, we're here for you. And thank you all for taking the time to listen to this episode 3 with Dorien Nunez from Omni Research. We'll see you next time.
Well, as we say here in New Orleans, les say les bon temps roulés, but also as we say here in New Orleans, stay home, stay safe.
I love it. Thank you all. Stay home and stay safe. For everyone out there, we are working around the clock, speaking with state and local governments, innovators, and subject matter experts to bring the latest information on the coronavirus and its impacts to state and local government. If you have a request for us to cover certain topics or a guest you want to hear from, send us your request to our new email address, info@gov-talk.com. We're also working on a website that will host episode summaries, resources from associations, updates from state and local governments, and information on the topics and speakers we cover. Stay tuned to future episodes for updates and more. That's all the time we have for today. Be well, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.